Child labor was widespread in the United States economy until the 1930s. Child laborers suffered through harsh conditions from injury by manual and tedious labor, loss of education, and often disease from unsafe work sites. Children in the workforce also had very low wages. Child labor began because factories and mills needed people to work for them that accepted decreased wages, increased hours, and people with small hands to work the mills. In 1880, 32.5% of males aged 10 to 15 and 12.2% of females aged 10 to 15 were in the labor force. Child labor was so widespread in the United States that in 1910, almost 2 million children were in the workforce. According to the article, Child Labor in the Gulf Coast, it was common for children in the workforce to be beaten and intentionally denied an education. A man named Mr. Dunbar says, "I have seen them whip the children when they do not work. Of course, we don't want the child laborer people to know this. They would not understand that it is better for these low people to be at work. They don't want school. The children who grow up and can't read and write are always better off than those who can, because as soon as they get a smattering of education, they want to strike for higher wages. You can look around all this place and you won't see a sickly child. It's wonderful how they do it, working as they do. They sometimes get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're just like cattle. If you just let them know when they have to work, everyone will tumble out of bed, and without washing or eating, they'll be at the plant in a jiffy." According to the article, Child Labor in the Gulf Coast, children were often injured by factory equipment. As one sympathetic worker said, "I wish I did not have to have the children around, because they are always in the way of the trucker and getting hurt." A 1917 through 1919 study following families with working children found that children's incomes accounted for 23% on average of the family income. One problem with the child labor laws was that they did not apply to the agricultural group. They were often omitted and exempted from the laws. In response to the horrible conditions associated with child labor, reformers stepped forward to end the bad working conditions and outlaw child labor. Albert Beveridge was the first person to introduce the national legislation for child labor. Although the bill was voted down, it did influence other initiatives. Alexander McKelway helped with the legislation to raise the minimum age for working girls from 12 to 14. He was also involved in creating the Keating-Owen Bill and the Palmer-Owen Bill, bills that worked towards abolishing child labor. Mother Jones was an activist for the industrial workers of the world. She held a march in 1903 towards Washington, D.C., demanding the end of child labor. Many other reformers such as Grace Abbott, Jane Addams, Samuel Gompers, and Lewis Hine all greatly contributed to the fight to end child labor. The Keating-Owen Act was one of the most influential child labor laws. It developed important standards for child labor. No child under 16 could work in places such as mills and factories. It also established strict time restraints for working hours. This act would change the lifestyle of families all over industrial areas. Industrialization and economic growth led to rising incomes, which with legislation reduced the need for families to put their kids in the workforce. The participation of hardworking reformers and the rejection of bad working conditions by the general public resulted in the abolition of child labor.